Hi everyone, I'm Renee and I'm a senior product manager on the AWS Amplify team, and I'm actually here to talk to you about how we can visually build extensible full stack apps with AWS Amplify. Now, there's quite a few things to cover, but I'm just going to go and say that really today what we care about is how AWS can make it easy for front-end developers to go from an idea to a production-ready app really, really fast. Now, what does that mean? It's very loaded. So let's look at kind of who we're talking about here. For us, we really, really care about front-end development. And front-end developers really build what users see. And if you think about it, over the next few years, over 500 million apps still need to be built. And today, there are 14 million web developers and 10 million mobile developers. That's over half of the entire developer ecosystem. Now, the evolution of front-end is actually quite an interesting one for us to observe because it started kind of with this World Wide Web. Everybody knows HTML, and then JavaScript came along and sprinkled some business logic, essentially client side to it. And then Ajax really revolutionized the asynchronous interactivity of a web page. And then more and more capabilities started becoming available for front-end developers, like the iPhone to bring apps directly to the palm of your customers, right? And then also new technologies like serverless and React now make it easier than ever to build front-end applications that also has more cloud logic. And we can kind of really see that evolution. Like this is what Amazon.com looked like in the 90s, where it just had a few static content in there and then a hyperlink that you can click on, right? Or social media apps in the 2000s, where suddenly it becomes a little bit more feature rich. There's more media on it. There's live video streaming. There's video streaming on the product itself. So it becomes more powerful. And then later on, obviously, the apps were born when the iPhone was announced in 2007, really bringing these feature-rich, highly performant apps to the devices that's in the palm of everybody's hands. And then now we're kind of living in a world where web apps are actually more present than ever. Web apps have become responsive as we change between different screen sizes. They've become more performant. They feel like almost native apps. And also they've become super feature rich, like Spotify. You can listen to Spotify. It's a music app that used to not be possible before 2010 and the years before. Now this is really, really something impressive that we all love to use. And the user experience becomes more important than ever before. Now, what has really led to this improvement of all of these front-end applications? One key part is that frameworks like React have really evolved and making it so much easier for developers to build client-side logic around their user interfaces, and they don't have to wait on a full round trip to the server to get like the next level of UI that they want to surface to a customer. Also, browsers have become more powerful. We've got faster browsers than ever before. We have capabilities like IndexedDB and caches. Cloud computing has come along to also make storing data in the background and building custom business logic and service using Lambda much easier. And last but not least, the end user expectations from web apps now really match the native mobile application experiences. That's why we see companies like Airbnb and Spotify put so much emphasis on the user experience themselves. Now, how have these changes actually impacted the responsibility of a front-end developer? Right? Because if we look at the full spectrum of a full stack app, the front end is kind of on the right-hand side where you've got HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and it like slowly blends into the backend where there's database information, servers, server-side languages now. And there's different evolutions of technologies that have made these backend concepts more and more approachable for front-end developers, like GraphQL for APIs, Node.js to allow basically front-end developers to use the language they already know and love in their backend, and capabilities like serverless so that there's not even anything around DevOps that they really need to care about when they get started. And so front-end developers are actually increasingly becoming responsible for building the full stack functionality. And so there is actually a good article from Chris Coyer from CSS Tricks about this, saying that, oh, so we're all full stack developers now. So we really built Amplify to make it easy for front-end developers to build full stack apps. And what do we mean by that? Well, we have analyzed the product development workflows of a modern application, right? People know that there's some iteration between a product manager and a UX designer that iterate that on the UI designs themselves, like how does the application look and feel? And then once those designs have been determined, developers actually transform them into code. They basically make sure that these UI designs can be translated into components that they can reuse over and over again. They have layout capabilities, and then bind these UIs to data and then write additional custom business logic for interactivity, right? Or for another data transaction or logging in and all these different capabilities. And this is really, really cool, but somehow the UI designs always look just slightly different than the actual product that is implemented in code. When we surveyed 800 developers, 80% of them are telling us that they're working with a designer as an integral part of their team. But then when we surveyed those designers, they said that only about 50% of their developers actually implemented their UI designs accurately according to spec. And so there's clearly some loss in translation here. So how do you solve this? Right? So there's two approaches we've been kind of seen emerging. Like you either build a solution that enables designers to take control end to end, meaning they also take on the custom business logic, the data handling, and so on and so forth. Or you can actually see a second option that people have been pursuing where they give developers the entire capabilities end to end, meaning they give developers more pre-built UI components that can kind of click together or code together rather without having to think too much about the overall design. Now, the problem is that neither of these approaches work. And they don't work because these are different skill sets with different areas of expertise. So what we really need is actually a solution to help facilitate the designer to developer handoff and really ensure that developers can incorporate these pixel perfect UI designs inside the real application they're shipping to customers. And that's why we're introducing AWS Amplify Studio. With Amplify Studio, you can visually build complete feature-rich apps in hours instead of weeks with full control over the application code. We're really there to try to make the developer more productive instead of forcing them to necessarily learn an entirely new tool set. So how we're doing that? We're giving developers the capability to build and manage your app backend directly using Amplify Studio. You can just model your application data, set up relationships between them, and you get exposed to GraphQL API that you can talk to. You can also do other things like set up authentication, authorization capabilities, file storage, and so on and so forth. But also we provide you a CLI toolchain to add additional custom business logic via functions, or even capabilities to extend beyond the features that were built into Amplify using CDK. And then also we have a lightweight management experience where you can browse the contents of your database, manage users and their groups, and so on and so forth. Now, let's first look at how Amplify Studio can accelerate your UI development. Okay, so this is Amplify Studio. With Amplify Studio, you get when you land on the experience, you first get a great overview of what you can do. You can set up your data models, you can view and edit your app contents, but also you can go and build UI, right? And if we look at building our UI, we can just click on it and we get a set of components that are ready to use that I can immediately integrate inside my application. So here we can see different type of cards that we can use and different layouts for like feature grids and stuff like that. But really what is important to us is that we can make sure the designer and the developer get to work closer together and really deliver a great end user experience. Now, this is where we have an integration with Figma, which is a very powerful third-party design tool. With Figma, designers can mock up their individual UI components and actually create really rich visual designs and mockups for the developer to take forward. Now, let's first look at the Figma file. So assume this is my current Figma file where I'm trying to rebuild like an Airbnb style application with a list of homes that I want to showcase to my customers. So as a designer, I can use Figma to really mock up all of these different components and edit them to my liking. Now, in this case, I've got an Airbnb card already created because we're building an Airbnb-like experience where we see a list of homes nearby. Now, let me first edit this design a little bit so that it's according to what my application needs for this particular card. And then I'll build also a completely new navigation bar from scratch. So I've just updated basically the heading text of our card using a pre-built component that was part of our design system in the first place. And of course, I changed the description text so the developers know that instead of descriptions, we should be putting the price of the home in there. Now next, let's actually start creating a navigation header for our application itself. Let me do that real quick. So with Amplify Studio, we're very compatible with Figma. And so if you're designing your components in Figma using best practices from Figma, we can actually translate them pixel perfect into code. So what I've done just now is I've created a new component in Figma, used the best capabilities that they already have, like auto layout so that it's responsive, and then put in a few components that are part of my application design, like a heading and then a sign-in button. And you can see these are responsive components. So even in Figma, they're aware that when I scale this, the individual elements in the children here, like my app and sign-in button, should stay towards the end of the end of the frame. Now that I've designed my app, let's actually see how Amplify can take this design and integrate it into my React app. Let's go first back to Amplify Studio. In here, I can click this button that says Sign in with Figma. In here, I can click this button called Sync with Figma. So when I sync with Figma, I get to actually see all of the different components that are part of my Figma file. Just like I have a GitHub pull request, I can actually reject and accept different component changes as they're coming in, right? So in here, there's some components that we're already aware of. And then if I continue forward, at some point, we'll be able to find our Airbnb card that is available here and our navigation item that is what's also available here. Now, I can also hit accept all, and then they will be part of my Amplify project. Okay, now our Amplify Studio has actually successfully synchronized all of these different components. And what we can do now is actually bind these components to data. So let's see how that looks like. Let's click on Configure on our component, and then we can specify a component property. In this case, I will want to have a home property for this particular card that it can render. I can first select the image and choose the source of that image to be the home's image URL. And then I can also click on the address itself and select that the label of the address should be the home's address. And then in addition to this, I can actually choose the price and also just show the price information, maybe with like a little $sign in here, a $sign, and then the amount, and then concatenate that with like the label per night. So here we can see this home in Oscar Springs costs $67 per night. So now I've set up these properties. You can see real application data streaming in, like from this particular home that is on 619 Christian Tunnel, costs $329 per night, and you got the image there as well. And I can actually go and click Shuffle Preview Data to see how this component scales with different image sizes, image data. So one thing I've actually already noticed is that I need to fix how the image scales, how it renders, because right now it's getting stretched. So I can actually change that in Figma as well, and it's going to honor that experience here as well. But showing one card is great. Really, every application is all about showing collections of information, right? So what we can do is actually start taking this one card and make it into a collection that we can use in our app. So let me create a collection right here. I'm going to call this the Airbnb card collection. Once I create it, there's a few options we can place. We can place the grid size. If I want to do a grid layout, we can make it a list layout as well. For us, let's do a grid. And then I can set information like the padding between the different elements so that it renders accordingly to what I want it to. I can also say that when this data is configured, it should have maybe it should maybe be sorted based on when a home was created. So if it was created earlier, then it should show up on top. Then it should show up on the bottom. So essentially showing all the new homes, on the very top, right? So let me just make sure I set that filter as well, and it's now going to organize all the data in that regard as well. Next thing that I can look at is how can I go and maybe make my navigation bar a little bit more dynamic as well? Like how can I parameterize this my app header file? So if I click on configure, I can actually expose a new property for this label and say this should be my header nav or header title property. Oh, sorry. My header title property. I can expose property as a top level prop. So now in code later on, I can actually set this header title property and configure the experience. Now, as a default value, I'm just going to put my app there for now. Okay, cool. So now we've got everything going and configured. Let's try to actually pull this down into our application and see how it looks like when I render it in code. In order to pull it down, all we have to do is run a single CLI command to make sure that our application is aware of all of these different components and generate all of the React code that these components are made of. So if I run Amplify pull in my project, what it does now is it connects to this project that was created in Amplify Studio. It's going to check for all the changes that are available there, and then download all the relevant information that is required to generate the code. So for instance, like, hey, which components have been added, or what kind of backend changes have I made, and so on and so forth. So you can see it is now telling me that it is generating the UI components. Okay. And if we now go into our component folder, UI components folder, we can actually see the Airbnb card. It is credible React code that anybody can understand, right? And it's really readable. That's something that's really amazing about the code generation that Amplify does. It's very, very easily understood. And if you think about it, we're really generating thousands of lines of code here on behalf of the developer. And we're also generating type sorting, so they get auto-completion as well as they type out individual properties and so on and so forth. Now, in my application, I essentially only have to do two things to basically get going. Let me first show up, like, this is the app that I'm running here. So I can say, hi, this is my app. And every time I save something, it's going to render it on the left-hand side. Now, to render these components that we looked at earlier, what I have to do is I have to import them. So let me first import the Airbnb card collection from the UI components folder. And with one line of code, essentially, or two lines of code rather here, we've got our component rendered. And it is pixel perfect in what I have designed in Figma as well. So if I put these two side by side, you can see they look exactly the same. Cool. Next, let's also make sure we can use our navigation bar as well. So we've got our Airbnb nav component. And again, with one line of code, it gets rendered into this app immediately. And then also here, I can set things like the header title, I believe. That was the setting that we wanted to expose. And we can show for different pages, like maybe different values. So this could be new homes. And you can see how it updates the navigation itself as well. Now, there are some elements that, as a designer, I cannot actually configure inside Figma. Like, for instance, that the width of this component should be always the window size. Right? There is no configuration that I can make in Figma to actually specify this. So for situations like that, what Amplify does is we actually give you a very nice way to set the properties that you're already familiar with for your React application inside with the Amplify generated components. So I can actually just say the width should be 100 VW, and then it is now scaling according to the screen size of my window here, the window size of my browser. So essentially, developers can use all the capabilities that they already know and love, have trained themselves for years, but we just really help them get along and get there a little bit faster, right? Cool. So this is really how we're thinking about accelerating UI development for front-end developers using Amplify Studio. So we have seen Amplify Studio now accelerate UI development, but building apps is only half of the picture. It's really about shipping it to customers. That is fantastic. So what Amplify also offers is a hosting solution that gives you the capability to ship your apps globally within seconds, essentially. We also provide a full stack continuous deployment mechanism that is completely based on Git, right? So if you just connect your GitHub repository, we're going to pick up any new changes and then automatically deploy them, and has many, many other features like custom domain setups, PR previews, some password protection as well, and just really helps you get your app out there to your customers faster. Now, let's see how we actually going to do that, right? So with Amplify Hosting, we can actually look at our application here inside the Amplify console. Right now, if we look at the hosting environment, there's essentially a mechanism for me to connect my GitHub repository to just automatically trigger builds. But there's also another quick way for me to publish an app by just using what is available built into Amplify CLI. So let me go back to the terminal. Now, in Amplify CLI, what I can do is I can execute a command called amplify publish, and what it will do is it will package up, run the build script on the front end, like Yarn build for React apps, and then take that and deploy it to the cloud. So here you can see it's kind of uploading different files, checking things in the backend, and then building the application and then publishing it. So now you can see how it executes the regular React build scripts. And once it is finished building, it actually deploys it, gives me a URL that I can immediately share with the world. Okay, great. So now that it is deployed, we actually get a URL that we can immediately use and share with the world. If I come here, you can actually see it's going to now load in all the different capabilities, and the components are configured in a way that is same as in Figma. I think I've configured the images here to be a fixed size, and therefore it is reacting like it is here. Great. So next, what I want us to kind of take a look at is also around how can we extend beyond the capabilities. Now, I briefly mentioned that we can use the Amplify CLI earlier to pull down all these different components and all the backend information and even publish our app to the world. But also what we can do is do more capabilities around your data, around your authentication, all that stuff within code. So with Amplify CLI, you can initialize your project, add API, and deploy that as well. So you're not constrained in any sort of way through the visual editor, but also you get all the code underneath. So something that we're really proud of at Amplify is that we really want to offer the best front-end developer experience, but still give customers the extensibility that they expect from a self-managed backend infrastructure. So looking at this problem, extensibility, we've really figured out that customers progressively need to be exposed to more and more extensibility, and they usually fall into these three buckets. Number one, they deeply care about how they can modify resources that Amplify generates. What if there's just this one setting that I need to tweak to go to production, but it's hidden from me, right? That's kind of the problem there. And then number two is, what if I want to add additional resources that's not built into my Amplify project, but I still want to use all of Amplify's multi-environment workflows and CI/CD systems? So we also have that problem that we need to solve. And then third, what if I reach a point where I need to deploy to production and I have a large organization with a centralized deployment team, and I need to basically deploy my application as a CDK app so it's in compliance with all the other tooling that my organization enforces? So we're really looking at how do we solve these three problems with Amplify. And the good thing is we have a solution for that. So first, let's look at how do we want to modify something. This is actually an issue that we have from a GitHub request, which is like, hey, my team really loves Amplify, I want to deploy to production, but what if I could change the default temporary password validity day setting for Amazon Cognito user pool? Because that's what my company requires me to do. Now, we will not necessarily expose like a CLI workflow for you to tweak this exact specific setting, but what we give you the ability to do is to override the generated resources to match your settings that you really need. So here is where we're going to use Amplify and CDK basically together to solve that issue. Let me switch back to code to kind of show you how to do that. Now I'm in my code base. We can see that above we have an authentication resource inside our application, and I want to modify that. And what I have to do is run Amplify override auth, essentially category of the resources that I want to change. And then it's going to identify that and generate a override code file that I then can use to modify each individual resource. So here you can see I've got my override.ts file with the function override, and I can actually select the resources that Amplify generates, right, by just using code completion. Super cool. And then say, oh, I care about the user pool. I care about the password policy, I believe, or policies in here. And sometimes you might not even be fully aware of what the policy entails or how to work with it. So here, what we can do is actually inline click on the link of the documentation and see what you can configure there as well. So here we can see, oh, you know what, a policy contains a password policy, and we should probably set that. So let's do that as well here. Oh, sorry. So with the override function, we can also reference existing settings already. So if you just want to override one particular setting of this password policy, I can actually use the JavaScript spread operator to place in all existing settings and just append all the changes that I care about. Let's do that real quick. And now I can change the temporary password validity days for my cognito user pool and set this to 3, like my application requires. So this can kind of show you that we've generated a lot of these resources for authentication, for data, for all your database capabilities, but we still give you the fine-tuned control under the hood for you to tweak every single resource detail so it applies and is in compliance with your application requirements. Now let's go back to the slides and look at another experience. And this is really about how can we add additional capabilities to our Amplify project that are not necessarily built into our core categories. Like what if we cannot use, what if we cannot use, for instance, Amazon SQS queue in our Amplify project, but my application really, really needs it. And so for that, we actually have this command called Amplify Add Custom. And with Amplify Add Custom, you can actually take advantage of the full depth and breadth of the 175 plus AWS services directly from within your Amplify app. So let's kind of go through how that looks like. I'm back in my terminal here, and I've got my Amplify app. I can run Amplify. Oh, sorry, typo there. I can run Amplify Add Custom. And it is going to give me an option to use CDK or CloudFormation to determine these additional resources. So let's say CDK for a second, and we can call this the SQS queue. And now what we're doing is we're creating a skeleton CDK stack within your Amplify project, and then giving you the ability to edit that further in CDK. So let me hide my terminal for a second. So here you can see a new CDK stack that is generated for you. Now, the good part about this is really using CDK like you would have usually done. There's nothing special that you really have to pay attention to if you're already familiar with CDK to develop your own custom resources. In this case, I'm just going to use some example code I've already written for you to kind of showcase this experience. So here you can see us basically creating that new SQS queue, and whenever it gets created, we set up a subscription that everything that lands in the queue. What we do here is now setting up a SQS queue and an SNS topic, and then we create a subscription that links the topic and that SQS queue together. And there's also some other interesting things here as well. Like we give you an Amplify project info function that allows you to extract the project information, the environment information, and so on and so forth for you. And in addition to that, we also give you mechanisms to basically easily support our multi-environment capabilities. As long as you're referencing the environment variable, you should be able to make sure that your custom resources work with Amplify's CI/CD system right out of the gate. Now, after all these changes, what I can do is go back to my terminal and actually just run Amplify push, which will deploy these changes to the cloud. So I can run Amplify push and deploy these changes to the cloud. Now, I'm not going to bore you with a deployment. It's going to take a few minutes. So let's go back to the slides and look at the last experience. Now, for this experience around export, this is really, really advanced. Customers like Rivian, Amazon Music, and other AWS teams actually use this to make sure they can deploy Amplify apps internally as well. So the real problem we're trying to solve is like, what if What if your DevOps teams requires you to leverage a centralized deployment pipeline to push your app to production? Well, with Amplify export command, you can actually export the Amplify backend as a CDK app to deploy with your own pipeline. And we've got some great resources online that shows you how you can set up multi-account, multi-region deployments. And this is exactly the capability that Amazon is even using to deploy Amazon Music with the Amplify backend in the cloud. Now let's look at Amazon Music, right? After we provide these capabilities, they basically told us that, this really helps them to integrate into their existing stack, and they can confidently bridge the gap between Amplify and strongly owned configurations within their team. And this is really helping them to deploy together and greatly simplify their build and deployment stacks. And Amazon Music is not a small app. They have almost 100,000 transactions per second. So when we say that Amplify scales, we really mean Amplify scales to any scale. So let's go through a final recap of what we've done today. We set up UI components in Figma, right? That was really, really cool. It was the front of the front, basically. And then we synced them to Studio as React code and use them in our React code, where we then also connected it with a database that was powered by GraphQL API, so that in our case, when we were building this Airbnb app, all the homes were streaming in and be rendered inside our web app. And then we just hosted our web app within minutes, right, with just a single command. And we can even build out an entire CI/CD flow as well if we had integrated Git with our hosting solution. Then last but not least, we've also looked at how can we extend beyond Amplify's built-in capabilities with CDK so that you can really go to any sort of scale that you need to. Now, this is the end of my presentation, so I want to thank you for listening in and tuning in. Here's how you can reach me on Rembrandt on Slack, or you can follow me on Twitter, Rene Brando, or AWS Amplify to really catch all the latest news. Thank you.